Good morning, Mets fans, and welcome to a Friday edition of Driving with Mr. Met. I am Mr. Met. Today is Friday, the 6th of December, and something interesting happened yesterday. The Mets got themselves a center fielder. Is it an everyday center fielder? I don't know. Is it a defensive-minded center fielder? Yes. I'm going to talk a little bit about that on today's show, which will be shorter than normal, but I'll get into the Jake Marisnick signing on this episode. So got off to a little bit later start this morning, and I'm going in a different direction than normal. I have to bring my son's computer to school because he left it at home. So this will be a little bit shorter of a show than normal, but that's okay because it'll let me focus on the single topic at hand. I know I wanted to talk this week about some free agent slash non-tender candidates who are now free agents that might be interesting to the Mets. And that discussion sort of lends itself to what I'm going to talk about today, which is that the Mets went out and traded with the Houston Astros for center fielder Jake Marisnick. Jake Marisnick is a defense-first center fielder for certain. He spent the last several seasons in Houston, including 2017 when he was teammates with Carlos Beltran. And this is, of all the things, this is the thing that sticks out the most to me about this trade. Yes, that last year the Mets dealt with Houston, of course, for J.D. Davis. But in this instance, I think this might be the first Carlos Beltran stamped personnel decision to take effect since Beltran was named manager. And I think Beltran spent time on the field in the dugout with Jake Marisnick, and I think if Beltran thought this guy was no good or wasn't going to be a fit, he would have voiced his opinion about that. I think the fact that Beltran knows him and vice versa is a huge help. And look, as center fielders go, for me, I've never seen anyone play the position better than Carlos Beltran. I've always said that he's the best center fielder I've ever watched. Play, and that includes Andrew Jones and Jim Edmonds and a number of really fantastic center fielders. For me, Beltran just played the position so well to the point where people thought he was lazy because he just got to everything, and he just knew what to do. His instincts were better than, and regardless, this is not about Carlos Beltran. This is about Jake Marisnick. And the point to this is, if Marisnick is a legitimate center fielder who Beltran can sort of stamp a seal of approval on, I think this bodes well for the Mets. Now, what does Marisnick's acquisition mean for everything else that's sort of floating around the team? So I think, number one, it nixes any opportunity that the Mets had to trade with the Pittsburgh Pirates for Starling Marte. And I personally, and I said this before, I did not want Marte. I thought he would have cost too much, and I don't think he would have been worth it. Because, look, the Pirates are trying to get that money off their books, and they want to bring in some talent that's going to cost a little bit. It might have been in the form of a Dom Smith. It might have been David Peterson. It might have been another high prospect or high-ranked prospect in the Mets system, which, as we all know, is sort of dwindled down to next to nothing as it is. And so to make this trade with Houston and give up only two lesser-known prospects, I think is a definite better move than giving up higher name prospects and potentially a guy off the major league roster with the Pirates. This also eliminates the Mets signing Kevin Pillar, who I suggested earlier this week as a non-tender candidate who would have been a nice fit. The difference with Pillar, though, is that he would not have been a starter. Marisnick has the potential to be a starter because his defense is really, really good. His offense isn't terrible, and he's very fast. So he becomes a dynamic type player that's different from most of the other guys that the Mets have in their lineup, and that he has some speed. He can use that to his advantage. What about playing time for other guys? Well, we don't really know how it's going to shake out, but if Marisnick is in center field, whether for the entire game or for part of the game, that's going to cut down significantly on the playing time for J.D. Davis. It's going to be J.D. Davis that takes the brunt of this acquisition because, if you think about it, putting Marisnick in center shifts Nimmo to left, keeps Conforto in right where he belongs. And Nimmo, frankly, belongs in left. So they're where they're supposed to be. Moving Nimmo to left shifts McNeil to third base full time. Good. McNeil's a very good third baseman. But the result of that is that it moves J.D. Davis to the bench. Now, that may not be the worst thing in the world, because we have seen J.D. Davis come off the bench and perform well. We've also seen Brandon Nimmo do that. We've also seen Dominic Smith do that. So while this is likely to cut down on J.D. Davis's playing time, I don't think it's going to do so at a huge detriment to the team. I think he'll still be able to get the at-bats, 400 to 500 at-bats in a season, by pinch hitting, by filling in, by spot starting in left field and at third base, potentially spelling Pete Alonso at first base. There's opportunity certainly to get Davis in the lineup. I think this hurts more than Davis. It hurts Dom Smith, because Dom's the guy who sort of takes a step back on the totem pole. And it's why I think, as much as I love him, if the Mets are going to move on from any one of these younger players who are under team control, it's likely to be Dom Smith, because there's just no fit for him anywhere. The Mets, they don't have a DH, and that's the problem here. You know, Dom Smith is basically profiling for the Mets as a DH because his natural position, first base, is certainly blocked for the foreseeable future. So anyhow, what does this mean? I don't really know, but I'm personally glad that the Mets aren't going to be spending $12 plus or more $1 million on Starling Marte. They were instead able to move on from a higher ticket item, bring in a lesser player, certainly, but a player who I think can improve the defense, which the Mets desperately needed up the middle. And that's the key takeaway for me from this. The other part, of course, is that I think this was a Beltran move, and I'm loving it. So that's going to wrap it up for me today. Shorter video than normal, like I said, but wanted to talk about Marisnick. Next week, I'm hopeful to be able to talk a little bit more about other opportunities the Mets might have to improve. The bullpen is the key issue here, and we need to look at that more closely next week. So that's going to be my plan and goal for next week, to spend the majority of the week talking about the bullpen and how it might be rebuilt. And part of that, spoiler alert, is going to be the discussion surrounding Seth Lugo's move to the rotation. So we'll get into that next week. But until then, I thank you for watching today. If you're not already doing so, you can follow me on Twitter at Mr_Met. And as always, let's go Mets.